allowed to place bets on who we will think will win in the upcoming triathlon. There are two contestants in this race. Let's call them contestant A, contestant B. Now, contestant A is given a 2 to 3 mile head start, and on top of that, all of the tools contestant A uses during the race are substantially better in quality compared to what was provided to contestant B. Who has the better odds of success? Contestant A or contestant B? Pretty obvious, right? The money's going on contestant A. Well, this is the exact type of odds that children coming from low-income households have in the competition we call life. Hello, my name is Anthony LaGuardia, and before I get rolling, I would just want to thank everyone for giving me your time to talk about something that I'm sure we will all agree is a major issue facing current as well as younger generations nationwide. My goal for this evening, the whole reason I'm here, is to shed a little bit of light on the darkest and deadliest cancer that is plaguing American society today. I'm talking, of course, about the achievement gap in education, also known as the education crisis in America. Hopefully, by the end of my time up here, I will have enlightened the ignorant and swayed the opinion of those who don't think this issue is an urgent one. And together we can walk out of here tonight and go to work on closing the achievement gap. Now, when you hear the achievement gap in education or education crisis, one might be prone to think about the U.S.'s global standings when it comes to education, but it's not what I'm here to talk about today. But if anyone was wondering, among the 34 OECD countries in 2012, the United States performed below average in mathematics and ranked 27th. Performance in reading and science are both close to the OECD average. The United States ranked 17th in reading and 20th in science. But the gap I'm concerned with, actually, when consolidated, facilitates the global gap. The definition of the achievement gap is the observed persistence disparity of educational measures between the performance of groups of students, especially groups defined by socioeconomic status, or SESs, race, ethnicity, and gender. In layman terms, it usually stems from these SESs, and it highlights the differences in the quality of schools, teachers, tools provided, programs, etc., between affluent areas and impoverished ones. The achievement gap divides the rich from the poor, the haves from the have-nots, the majorities from the minorities in this country. So, if poverty and the achievement gap go hand in hand, and poverty is a nationwide problem, then it is safe to say that the achievement gap is a nationwide problem. Socioeconomic status, although it is the most prevalent deciding factor when it comes to the level of education a child receives, it is not the only one, according to Richard Rothstein from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He attributes less adequate early childhood preparation, health differences, the absence of positive peers and community influences, the lack of high-quality after-school, weekend, and summer experiences, insufficient school resources, including high-quality teachers, excessively large classes, as well as unstable housing, as just a few other factors that play into the level of education certain children are exposed to. But due to time limitations tonight, I will be focusing on the factor of less adequate early childhood education, or preparation. I will dive into this later. Getting back to the point at hand, in 2011, the Census Bureau released new figures that showed 22% of American children were living in poverty and were attending high-poverty schools. In these schools, more than 75% of the students are eligible for free or reduced price lunch, which federal government uses as a measure to determine poverty. The racial breakdown by household was 6% were white, 15% were Asian, 19% were Pacific Islanders, 31% were American Indian Native Alaskans, 38% were Hispanics, and a whopping 42% of black students attended these schools. When you pair this information with the fact that poverty rate for children living with a female parent with no spouse present is 44%, with about 11% of the children between 6 and 18 lived in a household where neither parent had earned at least a high school credential. One can see how, if nothing is done to help combat this culture of poverty, future generations are bound to a cycle of perpetual failure. The problem is that this problem of inequality of education and resources cause much bigger problems down the road. As we discussed earlier, poverty plays an enormous role in this issue. So before I talk about the problems these kids are facing at school, I want to make sure everyone knows exactly what poverty means, at the same time for everyone to realize the problems these kids may be facing at home. What is poverty? According to the 2011 U.S. Census Bureau, poverty is a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 children under 18, that earn So if you're raising your child in one of these communities, there's a good chance you could be single parent, but the soonest possible issues you would see as your child grows older is juvenile delinquency rising in their peers, use of drugs becomes more normal and popular with every move up in grade, and a teen pregnancy rate that is much higher than their middle class and upper class contemporaries. All of these issues are factors that contribute and make up what is referred to as the dropout crisis. According to AmericanPromise.org, 1 in 4 African American and nearly 1 in 6 Hispanic students still attend dropout factories. These are high schools where fewer than 60% of the students graduate. And among these students that do graduate, 20% need remedial courses in college, and far too few earn a college degree. While some studies suggest that 50% or more of all new jobs in the next decade will require some kind of post-secondary education. Bad choices and negative environment are not the only reasons kids who live below the poverty line drop out. According to DoSomething.org, children living in poverty have a higher number of absenteeism or leave school altogether because they are more likely to have to work or care for their family members. To help understand the long-term implications that dropping out have on children living in poverty, I'd like to draw your attention to this list from DoSomething.org. Dropout rates of 16 to 25-year-old students who come from low-income families are 7 times more likely to drop out than those of families who are of higher incomes. 31% of people without a high school diploma will live in poverty. 40% of children living in poverty aren't prepared for preliminary school. Children that live below the poverty line are 1.3 times more likely to have developmental delays or learning disabilities than those who don't live in poverty. But by the end of the 4th grade, African American and Hispanic and low-income students are already 2 years behind grade level. By the time they reach 12th grade, they are 4 years behind. In 2013, the dropout rate for students in the nation was 8% for African American youth, 7% for Hispanic youth, and 4% for Asian youth, which are all higher than the dropout rate for Caucasian youth, which is 4%. Less than 30% of the students in the bottom quarter of incomes enroll in a 4-year school. Among that group, less than 50% graduate. And this is just the immediate problems caused by the achievement gap. These problems then contribute to issues that affect society, like more tax dollars going to public assistance to help the poor and single mothers. It is a large contributor as well to the crime rate. So again, more taxes are needed to enforce the law and keep prisoners in jail. Many of those in poverty, like I hinted to before, whether they know it or not, are trapped in a perpetual cycle that affects each and every generation. This is what is referred to as the culture of poverty. But it is physical. The achievement gap is well known inside academic circles, as it is shown in the last 40 years, where more has been written about the achievement gap than about any other topic in education. Building this awareness outwards is the absolute first step to closing the gap, because the most effective of the solutions require legislation in order to come to fruition. Out of the many effective proposed solutions, universal pre-K seems to be the most realistic and promising. Discussion of preschool often confuses kindergarten, which typically enrolls 4-year-olds, preschool, which typically enrolls 3-year-olds, and early childhood programs, which enroll toddlers, all of which come with an out-of-pocket cost to the parents. And when they are all put together, the children fortunate enough to have attended these early childhood programs are given a 2 to 3 year head start compared to the 30 million plus less fortunate contemporaries. Remember that triathlon analogy I used at the beginning of this presentation? The delay in accessible education reflects the 2-mile head start, and the poor school funding, community resources, and home life represent the quality of the tools that were available for the contestants. But we can level the playing field for children across America with universal pre-K. Popular studies found that individuals who enroll in a quality preschool program ultimately earn up to $2,000 more a month than those who do not. Young people who were in preschool programs are more likely to graduate from high school, own their own homes, have longer marriages, are less likely to repeat grades, need special education, or get into future trouble with the law. This combats all the long-term problems of the achievement gap, which, if you can remember, were the trouble with the law, public assistance dependency, and single-parent households. Single-parent households, sorry. A program that is universal, which served all 3 and 4-year-olds. A program that is universal, which serves all 3 and 4-year-olds, would cost $50 billion. But over the next 40 years, it would create over $213 billion in value, for the net gain of $163 billion. If you're still thinking $50 billion is way too much to spend, let me show you where your money could be spending, and it currently is. This is a graph of a breakdown by state of how much each state pays per student of early childhood education and preschool programs, and the cost per inmate to keep them in jail for the same amount of time. It's staggering when you realize the disparity. And yet, if you can remember, or if you were aware, America is the leading incarceration rate in the world. So keep this in mind, keep in mind that investing in early childhood education does not only increase the productivity of the student into adulthood, but it also cuts public assistance dependency as well as cutting the crime rate, which in turn cuts prison costs, which you have been shown to be very, very costly. I'm not here to push a specific theory or program. I am here to spread awareness and hopefully gain support in an issue that is long overdue in terms of an issue that needs immediate attention. As you have just seen, universal pre-K is a start that is both realistic and beneficial, and a beneficial first step to the children who are desperately in need of a fighting chance and for the society as a whole. But before we can get the legislation on board, we must enlighten others to the darker parts of our social systems that are, for lack of better words, ass backwards, if you ask me. Without the support of the people, politicians will continue to sweep the issue under the rug. The time to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves is now. These kids need a positive role model and a well-lit road that leads them out of perpetual poverty, rather than one that leads them back into it. The parents have fallen victim to this achievement gap in education, and this lifestyle is all they know. We need to stop pointing fingers and start lending hands. Thank you. You've all been great. Let's fix the achievement gap.